In the late 90s, the then WWF completely reinvented itself, going from homogenized family pap to graphic adult-themed excess in almost no time at all. Vince McMahon began overseeing a product that attempted to see just how far it could push the envelope. And when a business pushes the envelope regularly, they do run the risk of flying too close to the open flame. In the WWF's quest to astonish and thrill its audience, many a name brand star had taken daunting risks, sometimes with unnerving and regrettable results. In fact, McMahon found himself looking on in horror one night in 2001 when the wrestler enduring an ungodly thrashing was his own son. This is Behind the Match. One of the most important figures on WWF television in the spring of 2001 was Shane McMahon. The cavalier-minded son of Vince had famously usurped the purchase of WCW out from under his father's nose, and was going to be a key figure in the launch of a WWF-occupied World Championship Wrestling. At the time of the storyline, Shane was presented as valiant, having defended his mother Linda's honor during that whole Vince dopes up his distraught wife while fooling around right in front of her face storyline. Revenge was had by the babyface side of the McMahon family at WrestleMania X7, culminating with Shane blasting his father with a trash can to the face with a coast-to-coast dropkick adding rear propulsion. Shane went on to outwit, outmaneuver, and out-death-defy the Big Show at Backlash the following month in a last man standing match. Although WCW had been long presented as an enemy force in WWF canon, the man leading them in story couldn't have looked more like a daring and gutsy superhero. Shane McMahon may not have been the greatest wrestler in the world, but audiences truly admired him, especially in 2001. He was a fan favorite strictly for the insane risks he took, especially for a man that certainly had enough money to peaceably lounge by the pool every day for the next 6 decades. Somebody who wasn't a favorite was Kurt Angle, though that had more to do with his character alignment. Even though fans had caught on to Angle's outstanding athleticism and technical skills, the Kurt Angle character was generally about as uncool as one could be, a dorky mama's boy whose brashness and social naivete proved to be a potent blend. Actually, Angle was so gifted a performer that he made an uncool character cool, as he dispensed high amounts of comic aloofness, thus making himself indispensable in just about every possible facet of television wrestling. When fans booed the Olympic gold medalist, it was usually through an appreciative smile. To this point, Angle's comedic brilliance tended to override his wrestling mastery, but not always. At the same WrestleMania X7 where Shane battled his father, Angle matched up against Chris Benoit in one of the most purely scientific matches that the sports entertainment giant had broadcast to that point. Fans not used to seeing much wrestling in the World Wrestling Federation applauded respectfully through their intricate match sequences. Angle's stark duality served him well, no matter who he worked with. Whatever the WWF needed Angle to be in a given storyline, he had the ability to play that part to the fullest hilt. And when Angle matched up with Shane McMahon seemingly out of the blue in 2001, some probably figured they were in for something a bit on the light-hearted side. It began innocently and randomly enough in true Insta-feud fashion. At the 2001 Judgment Day pay-per-view, Angle reclaimed his stolen gold medals from Benoit in a 2 out of 3 falls match. The following night on Raw, the self-indulgent Angle organized a formal ceremony for himself in which he basically recreated his 1996 obtaining of the medals, only more intentionally mawkish and absurdly sentimental. Then, for reasons, McMahon interrupted Angle's moment of hedonism in order to remind us all that WCW's rebirth was coming soon. The interjection of McMahon was quite random, as he hadn't been seen in the 3 weeks since Backlash and he'd had no prior on-screen connection with Angle, thus little reason to rain on Angle's tearful parade. To make matters worse, the crowd in San Jose booed the promise of a WCW comeback. So here was Golden Boy Shane serving as the face of an entity WWF fans had been conditioned to hate for the last 5 or 6 years, and, well, it seems they still hate it. WCW aside, the real purpose of the segment was to link Angle and McMahon as enemies. This was firmly achieved by a rather miffed Olympian giving McMahon the Angle slam off the medal stand. Angle went on to demand a match with Shane at the forthcoming King of the Ring. In deference to Shane's limited wrestling skills, the match was scheduled as a street fight, thus ensuring that mayhem was definitely likely. But that wouldn't be Angle's only match at the pay-per-view. As the year 2000's King of the Ring, the hyper-competitive Angle had designs on repeating as Monarch. Thus, Angle defeated Hardcore Holly in a qualifying bout to enter the 2001 tournament and subsequently submitted Jeff Hardy in a televised quarter-final. He joined a semi-final field that included 3 on-screen allies in Edge, Christian, and their buddy Rhino. Just like the 2000 event, there was a reasonable chance that Angle could be wrestling 3 times in one night. But while Angle had done 3 matches in a night before, there was never an elaborate stunt show counted among them. As Angle recalls, he and Shane met every Wednesday for 4 weeks preceding King of the Ring, going over spots and working to put together what was going to be a lengthy match. Veteran wrestler Al Snow not only helped train Shane for the match, but Angle credits Snow for assembling the structure of the street fight. To this point, McMahon had built his in-ring identity on high-wire stunts. The flying elbow smash through the Spanish announce table he performed on Test at the 1999 SummerSlam was merely a small sample of the craziness that would follow. His backwards fall from an entrance truss at the 2000 SummerSlam rates among the most preposterous stunts ever undertaken in any wrestling promotion, be it a global empire or an outlaw mud show. The street fight at King of the Ring wouldn't include much in the way of recreational skydiving, but it looked to be spectacular nonetheless. Until that match started though, Angle was gonna have a busy enough night. The opening pay-per-view bout pitted Angle against Christian in a semi-final match. It was a solid, well-worked 8-minute bout that was perhaps hampered by neither man being a true babyface, so the crowd wasn't sure how to exactly invest their energy. The end came when Shane ran interference, helping Angle score the win. It made perfect sense. McMahon was ensuring that Angle wrestled twice before the street fight to sufficiently wear him down before squaring off against him. That may have been the story, but Angle actually did come out of the Christian match at less than optimal condition. He was knocked loopy while performing an overhead suplex, and later reports indicate that Angle did suffer a concussion. A couple of 9-minute matches acted as buffer between then and Angle's next match, the final tournament bout against an ascending Edge. Angle credited Edge for getting him through the match because he was dazed enough to where he couldn't recall the exact layout. And to make matters worse, Angle came out of the Edge match with a busted lip, the apparent result of a snug strike. Shane interfered once again, this time taking down Angle with a spear. That allowed Edge to hit his Impaler DDT to win the crown, leaving Angle worn down after 2 matches and without the comforts of having retained the kingship. So to this point, Kurt Angle has wrestled for almost 19 minutes in total. He suffered at least a mild concussion, had his mouth busted open, needed some help in walking through the second match due to a foggy mind, and is now tasked with carrying a 20+ minute spectacle full of big spots with an athletically capable non-wrestler. After Angle vs Edge, a 7-minute light heavyweight title match took place, as did an extensive confrontation between Undertaker and DDP. But no matter how much action filled the gaps between Angle's matches, he was still going into the street fight in far less than mint condition. What's open for debate is which of the two came out of the match in better shape. The street fight finally commenced and began with some feverish wrestling sequences. Then Angle got rocked once more, this time from a Shane punch above the right eye that drew blood. McMahon soon found out just how hard Angle can hit when the grappling god had the boy wonder on the canvas and began raining down with clubbing blows across the sides and back. According to Shane, he was left numb by the shots and found it hard to catch his breath. From there, the action alternated between weapon strikes and Shane uncharacteristically trying to beat the wrestling great with submission holds. So far, the match isn't anything too far off the beaten path of a Shane McMahon special. Some fun with props, a few high-risk spots like a shooting Shane press onto a trash can with the battered and clouded Angle more than holding his own. The two then headed toward the aisleway, and that's where the match began its drastic turn. At one juncture, Angle attempted a routine vertical suplex in the middle of the aisle. Shane blocked and countered with one of his own, slamming Angle's lower back hard onto the unpadded floor. Upon impact, Angle immediately struggled to breathe and remembers his hands shaking in pain. That's because he sustained a fractured tailbone on the landing, and Shane recalls Angle barely being able to emit a sound due to the unimaginable agony that he was in. Somehow, through some rare resilience, Angle was able to pull himself to his feet. His verticality was key to the next sequence of spots, and they were going to be a doozy. As part of the King of the Ring entrance set, there were glass panels customized with the letters KOR in a fancy, rather regal font. The objective for Angle was to suplex McMahon through the glass panels in what was sure to be a brutal sequence. Angle was under the impression that the panels were made of sugar glass, a brittle form of sugar that large quantities of can be pressed together to make simulated glass. Its texture breaks away easily with a light enough touch. Film and stage productions have used sugar glass for just what was intended here, to break away on contact and give the illusion of shattered glass while minimizing injury. According to Angle, there was apparently a mix-up somewhere along the way of procuring props because this was no special trick glass comprising these panels. Angle claims that this was genuine plexiglass. A sheet of plexiglass requires 6 to 17 times more impact to break than a normal sheet of glass, so the difference between plexiglass and intentionally brittle sugar glass is substantial. However, Bruce Pritchard has disputed that this was plexiglass. He claims that while, yes, the wrong kind of glass was procured, the panels were not made of plexiglass, but rather a still breakable form of glass that had been given a double coat of paint for design purposes, which unintentionally reinforced the panels. Pritchard also notes that the reason why sugar glass wasn't used is because the opening pyro would have been enough to shatter the fragile material. One thing's for sure though, Angle and Shane would have definitely preferred sugar glass given what happened next. As was the idea, Angle clasped his hands around Shane's torso and went to perform his overhead belly-to-belly throw. But there are two problems. One was Angle's fractured tailbone, which had greatly diminished his ability to swiftly throw Shane, and the other, naturally, was that unforgiving panel, because when Shane collided with it, he promptly fell straight down on top of his head. The sickening thud of McMahon's cranium smacking the concrete floor made for a rather disturbing sound. As Shane lay on the floor, a faint ringing filled his ears, as he would later recall. Referee Mike Chioda asked if he was alright, but Shane said he couldn't even hear him. Meanwhile, at the gorilla position, Shane's father Vince was highly upset. According to Shane, Vince wanted to legitimately halt the match then and there and tried ordering Chioda through the referee's earpiece to end it. Pritchard tells a slightly different version of events, claiming that he was the one on the headset with Chioda and that Vince wasn't so much trying to stop the match, but was trying to call off the planned glass sequence after the first attempt went so badly. The orders were relayed, but the combatants continued on at the insistence of a battered Shane. Whether he was defiant or just too loopy to know better isn't quite clear. They went for a second suplex, with an injured Angle putting greater exertion into the throw. This time, the panel shattered, sending hundreds of frosty white shards into the air as both men landed on the cold, unforgiving floor. Each man bled after hitting the glass, Shane from his scalp and face, and Angle from different parts of his back and arms. Angle believed the match was over after that, but a clearly hurting Shane was steadfast about continuing. From behind the entrance facade, they tried the same suplex through another panel, this time going in the opposite direction. Both men were understandably exhausted by this time, and Shane didn't hit the glass with the same gusto as he once had. Fortunately, Angle anticipated the worst possible result this time and got his hands up to better break Shane's descent after he bounced off the glass. A second attempt produced the same result, but determined to carry on, a fifth throw did break the glass. Only instead of performing a suplex, Angle just flung Shane through the panel like a bouncer expelling an unruly drunk from a nightclub. Angle admitted that he regretted having to do that, seeing as he was dangerously sending Shane face first through the reinforced glass. Meanwhile, Vince was in the back cursing up a storm after his orders to ditch the sequence fell on apparently deaf ears. Alas, the match played on, with Angle using a rolling equipment case to wheel out what was left of Shane back toward the ring. There was a planned finish, one that would prove difficult under even ideal circumstances and seemed like a daunting task for two men in otherworldly amounts of pain. Angle was to end Shane's night with a top rope angle slam, a move that requires high amounts of strength and balance even on simple solid ground. An avalanche version was all the more perilous. Fortunately, there was a prop on hand to make things easier, a long, narrow piece of wood that Angle managed to use as a platform extension, bridging the ropes in the corner. While standing on that board for support, Angle hoisted Shane up for the breathtaking angle slam from above. He could only get a fraction of his arm across Shane on the ensuing pinfall attempt, but after 26 minutes of hell, that was enough to end it. The match was a car wreck, though it's up to the individual to decide how to interpret that. Those praising it were enthralled by the violent spectacle, the dramatic grit on display from two men that took the fight to the edge. Others criticized how out of hand things had gotten, while fearing what might be done next in a can you top this business to try and one-up it. Then there were critics who could see it both ways. Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter gave the match a 4-star rating while lamenting the match's dangerous structure, especially when the planned spots began to go horribly awry. Angle and Shane were both briefly hospitalized that night to make sure they were okay on the whole. Angle missed a few bookings over the following week and didn't wrestle again until the July 9th episode of Raw 15 nights later. They were actually lucky compared to some of the other stars on the card. Steve Austin went on to miss 3 weeks of action after breaking his hand during the main event, when an intruding Booker T dropped him on the commentary table. Chris Benoit, one of Austin's opponents, had been working through a serious neck injury for close to a month and was written out after the pay-per-view to have fusion surgery. He'd go on to miss a year of action. All of this on top of Triple H tearing his quadriceps the previous month, and The Rock not returning from his Hollywood excursion until the end of July, and the WWF main event tier was becoming very thin. The last thing they needed was for Angle and even a part-time attraction like Shane to end up on injured reserve as well. Today, the match has a mixed legacy. It's inarguably one of the most brutal showings in WWE history, and how one feels about that is unique to their point of view. It's held in high esteem as hard-to-top Attitude Era style drama, just as it exists as a cautionary tale of how things can go very wrong in a match depending on the cooperation of environmental hazards. And it's also a key reason why referee discretion is an important thing. But there is consensus on one point. The Kurt Angle vs Shane McMahon street fight from the 2001 King of the Ring is an entirely unique bout. For reasons relating to spectacle, planning, and safety, there isn't likely to ever be a match anytime soon that could duplicate the events from this unforgettable display.